Hi, everybody. This is Melody LeBaron here with another Agents of Transformation interview, this time with William Peters. William Peters is the founder of the Shared Crossing Project, whose mission is to positively transform relationships to death and dying through education and raising awareness about shared crossings and their healing benefits. As the director of the Shared Crossing Research Initiative, William and his team collect and study extraordinary end-of-life experiences. And that is how I met William, because they contacted me and we did 4 hours of video about my 7 shared death experiences. William is a global leader in shared death studies and end-of-life phenomena. He has developed methods to facilitate the shared death experience and to assist experiencers in meaningfully integrating their experiences. William is a psychotherapist at the Family Therapy Institute of Santa Barbara, where he specializes in end-of-life counseling as a means toward psycho-spiritual evolution. He served as a hospice worker with the Zen Hospice Project in San Francisco. His work is informed by his own 2 near-death experiences and a variety of shared crossings. He has presented at the American Academy of Hospice and Palliative Medicine's annual conference, and his work has appeared in the American Journal of Hospice and Palliative Medicine and in Omega, Journal of Death Studies. William's book is At Heaven's Door: What Shared Journeys to the Afterlife Teach About Dying Well and Living Better. So welcome, William.
Thank you, Melody. Good to be here.
It's wonderful to see you again, to be with you again. And we talked a bit earlier about how both of us really are members of a larger community that is restoring death to its rightful place in the circle of life, and we're proponents of natural death. So what put you on the path to working with the dying and their caregivers and understanding these shared death experiences?
Yeah, great question. As I look back on it now, it's clear that my early near-death experiences, one that I had at 17 years old, and then another one I had in an ICU when I was 32, were instrumental in bringing me here, if not the primary causal events. And I should say my first near-death experience was 17 years old, skiing accident, fractured my spine in a high-speed accident. Pretty classic NDE in that upon impact, I sailed away from my body, could see my physical body on the ski slope, entered into a beautiful universe, had a life review, went through that tunnel and saw the light at the end of the tunnel. And then I realized I was dying. And I was really not happy that I was dying. I also realized that I had been in that space many times before, like I want to say hundreds, if not thousands of times before, and realizing that I had died and that I didn't want to die. So obviously I pled with God. It was quite a one-sided conversation, I should say. Let me go back. I haven't done my work. I know I have something to do here. I don't want to waste another life. And then finally, a gentle pushback from this loving, vast, awesome source, just saying, make something of your life. And so I returned. I didn't think about that experience at all. For many years, I would have another shared death experience, another near-death experience in an ICU. I'll just say briefly that I had a severe blood imbalance and was in danger of essentially drowning in my blood. For medical types, was idiopathic thrombocytopenia. And I hovered above my body in the ICU, basically just at the height of the ceiling for probably 2 to 4 hours in the middle of the night. And I realized from this experience quite clearly that whatever I am, I'm not my physical body, because I was listening to conversation in the ICU by nurses, by doctors. And I was at that point, for much of it, I was what I would call a kind of a non-entity observing something, observing consciousness. I was not attached to my physical body that was in one of the beds. I didn't even know that I was related to one of the bodies in the bed until somebody started talking. One of the nurses started talking about this 32-year-old man who's very healthy. We don't know why he's here. I'm going, that's kind of strange. And so I kind of looked around and went over to the bed they were talking about. I said, wait a minute, I think that's me. So it was that sense of consciousness, that kind of awareness of self that was really not connected to a human life in a certain sense. So those are the early experiences. I must say, I really was resistant to going into death and dying as a profession until I think later, even after that, I had an experience with my grandmother where she was dying and talking to deceased relatives. And I was just taking notes on this conversation. And then I realized, wait a minute, there's a lot going on here. And it was all starting to line up. And then I went in Zen hospice, and there I would have my own shared death experiences. One in particular, which is I was just reading to a gentleman, Ron. And as I had done every afternoon that I was working with him, and he was unresponsive. And in the midst of this conversation, I popped out of my body and I was right there hovering above my body. I was still reading. I could see the book I was reading. I was looking at myself from above, and there's Ron. I'm looking right at him in the bed, but then there's Ron right next to me, and he's suspended and he's looking with me, and he's if to say, check this out. He's very comfortable saying to me, hey, this is where I am. This is where I've been. And he's happy. He's joyful. He's out of his, body that was, kind of in a good deal of distress as he was finally dying. So those are the experiences that really got me into this. And then the last piece was meeting Raymond Moody sometime later, and him talking about the shared death experience, and me saying, I have had a lot of these experiences, and I've tried to talk about them, and nobody knows what they are, and they often get dismissed. And I just learned, like so many of us as shared death experiencers, that it's not safe to share these experiences. And so when I met Raymond was very affirming of my research, of my desire to do research. And here we are some, 12, 13 years later after I met Raymond, and we have the largest, most robust research institute in the world dedicated to shared death experiences.
Yeah.
So that's it. That was a long answer, but thank you.
Yeah. I mean, it's very exciting. I will never forget the feeling that I had when I first looked at the Shared Crossing website and realized, oh, this is exactly what happened for me when I was 35 years old and my mother died in my arms. And I felt her spirit leave her body. I felt her life review. I saw what happened as she exited. And the wonderful thing is my dad and some of my sisters were in the room with me, and they experienced part of it. And so it was like, okay, I had that validation. And then 5 years later, my younger sister, Ruthie, died. We all had a little bit of the experience. I was the closest to her, so I was maybe having a little more of it. And then 2 years after that, when my son died, I had a profoundly life-altering. I mean, they were all life-altering. Every single one of my shared death experiences has shifted my assemblage point of my identity. But the one with my son, there had been an accident, and the Vanderbilt Hospital doctors were trying to be kind and compassionate, and they weren't giving us all the information. All we knew is that he was on life support. They wouldn't tell us for a couple of days that he had no brain function. And so I had, rushed to the hospital when I got the news about the accident, and I had been awake for 2 days. Like, I don't think I slept for 2 days. And I finally fell asleep. And all of a sudden, I became aware that someone was in the room with me. And I thought, oh, it's my mother. She's come to comfort me. And then I realized this isn't what my mother feels like when she comes to me. And I thought, well, it's my sister. And then I realized, no, it's not. And I opened my awareness. And then I heard Logan's voice. And he said, Mom, I had a choice. And I want to go on. Please let me go. And the moment my heart surrendered to his choice, I felt him take me by the hand, and I was out of my body and flying through the weave of time and space with him. And I won't go into all the detail of what he showed me, but I understood his joy and understood that he was complete with this experience. And, you know, reflecting back on that later, because although that experience helped me to come into a place of acceptance, the grief was still intense. And so it doesn't take away your grief, but even in the worst of the grief, I feel like that shared death experience supported me and mitigated maybe some of the worst of it. And you know, and then just a few years later, I was a member of the Compassionate Friends support group, and I was helping new parents. So I just wonder if you can speak to, you've worked with so many people around the world, and this book is filled with one experience after another of these beautiful shared death experiences. What have you noticed is a result for the experiencer of having a shared crossing?
Yeah, wonderful. And thank you for sharing all three of your experiences of the 7, because we did have quite an extensive interview with you, learned so much about your various shared death experiences. And then the one with Logan is your son is so profound. And that one where you actually go through the universe with him, and he shows you where he is and what his experience is, and he allows you to sense and feel what he senses and feel. And as a loving mother, you realize it's like it's downloaded into you in a knowing that cannot be described in this realm, that I need to let him go. He is where he needs to be. And that message delivered through the soul and heart is undeniable. So this is the power of the shared death experience, one of many transformational aspects. And that is that when you have this experience from your son in this case, or any loved one, no matter how much you love that person and you want them to be with you all the time in this earthly human experience, when you have that experience, you realize there is a higher calling at place here. There is something greater beyond our human definition or capacity to understand. But when it's given to you in the shared death experience, in that different state that you're in, you never forget it. This is beyond memory. This is beyond time and space. This is a consciousness. And so your experience of grief is different because of this. You still miss him, in this case, your son, but you also have that, tragic loss contextualized by the greater reality, the ultimate reality of our existence as timeless beings on a journey through, this dimension of human experience and beyond. And when you get that, yes, you grieve. You always do grieve someone who you love, but it's different. You have a greater understanding, and it actually allows you to grieve more fully, because one of the side effects from this, and we know this from our research, is not only that your grief is, as we say, as I'm a psychotherapist, we call this grief reconciliation. The grief reconciliation is imbued with more meaning and more understanding. So the loss is more easily, processed, reconciled. But we also know something else about this, Melody, and that is that you are aware that your departed loved one is alive and well in a benevolent afterlife. That is also one of our most profound documented findings. You have a sense that you'll see your departed loved one again. And you know that this human life is somewhat temporary, and it leads to another afterlife that is good and benevolent. And so your fear of death is greatly diminished, if not alleviated completely. And then the final profound after effect we see is that you come back to this human experience with a greater understanding about the purpose and meaning of not just human lives in general, but yours in particular. And so that's why when I talk to someone like you, having had so many of these shared death experiences and other spiritually transformative experiences, you are a perfect example of a shared death experiencer. You are purpose and meaning driven in your life. And this is what we see as well. And I'm one of them too. I've had, multiple near-death experiences, and also, probably a couple dozen shared death experiences. And one last thing about this, you and I are very similar. When you have one shared death experience, in our study, we found that 41% of the people who have one experience have more than one. So there's something about developing an aptitude. I call them SDE Adepts. And so if you're around a death, you will likely be somehow drawn up into this space, more easily cross the veil and serve as a guide or witness to the transition of loved ones, which is such a wonderful experience, but it's also a great service, for you to let Logan go as you did, Logan being your son, to say to him, I see you, I love you, and I let you go.
Yeah. It's really interesting, your research. And I am curious because I know you probably talked to, I know from the book that you've talked to experiencers from around the world, some of whom find out later. I'm thinking of, I can't remember his name, but he was sitting on the windowsill. And when wasn't really even his stepson, was his future stepson, died. Like, he was engaged to the boy's mom and they had a really strong bond.
Yeah.
He didn't know until years later that someone else in that room, another member of the family, the boy's favorite aunt, had also experienced a shared crossing. So I guess I'm curious, like, why do you feel some people have this aptitude or adeptness and others don't?
This is the most challenging, perplexing, mysterious question. It's really the growing edge of our research. Like, why do some people have this and why not others? To be clear, we know that, and you brought this up quite adroitly, that the relationship is very, very important. And that doesn't mean that the relationship has to be with a blood relative or a mother or a father or a partner. I can tell you, when I worked in Zen hospice in a 24-bed open ward where mostly indigent people were coming to die because it was a public hospital of San Francisco, we as hospice volunteers would develop deep, trusting relationships right away with our clients, with our patients, because they had no one else in their life. And so this was in my mind, this was a training ground for shared death experiences and shared crossings of other types, because we might have been the most trusted bond at the end of their life if they had, unfortunately got to that state in their life where they had no other loved ones close to them. So I say that because a lot of hospice nurses have these experiences, and it's because at the moment of death, they may be the closest one who really sees them and honors them. And if they have a family full of resistance, holding on, this hospice worker may be the only one whose heart is open enough and consciousness clear enough to go with them. So, now I want to say, this is all conjecture, what I'm offering here. This is not, I can just tell you that qualitatively in our research, we see this. I can't tell you this is how it is based on, anything other than self-reports and observation. So I will also say this. I think it's really important. So I have been training people to have the shared death experience for almost a decade now, because when I first realized that this experience existed, had a name, and Raymond Moody and I had talked a good deal about it, the first thing I wanted to do was develop methods to help people have it.
Right.
Which was really putting the cart in front of the horse, because the healthcare community and others, the general public for sure, really didn't know about the experience. But I thought all I had to do was announce the experience and people would want to have it. So I started doing these trainings. And so, I've developed methods that allow people to have them. And it's all anecdotal, because I haven't really kept track of the hundreds, now a few hundreds that I've trained. But I can say this: the training seems to be most effective in 3 areas. And I should say that the ingredients are this. One, we teach about shared crossings generally, all end-of-life experiences, so that people's minds are open and receptive and not doubting. The second thing is we do a kind of life reviews, we do an in-depth life review looking at regrets and, unfinished business. And then we do, compassion and forgiveness exercises. And we work to a point of gratitude. Now, this is all done in different ways, usually in intensive workshops. And we finally bring people up to this state where they accept that they're going to die. Ideally, we do this work with loved ones, but increasingly, most people take the course alone and find wonderful people to do this, their own inner work with this. And then I teach these protocols, which are essentially when one person is dying, I teach them how to move their consciousness smoothly out of their body, how to orient into the afterlife, which I've been to a lot of times. So I kind of know the energetic landmarks, and I teach them how to turn back and call their loved ones to be with them. This also includes training for the surviving loved ones, caregivers, about how to remain open and receptive to these energetic calls from their departing loved ones. So that's the training. And I think if people can keep these elements in mind, I don't expect people to be able to have a shared death experience just by hearing this, but maybe they will, because there's a lot of people who just have them with no knowledge. I mean, you were one of them, and I was one of them initially. But I think these are the ingredients that I have seen be effective in generating these experiences. And once again, a lot of the people I've trained now become, adepts, serial shared death experiencers. Like, I mean, I'm a person, if you put me around a death in that field, and I do think being physically close helps, but I will say, for your viewers, 2/3 of these experiences, as you just gave, happened remotely. With you, Logan, you weren't even at Vanderbilt Hospital. No. And 2/3 of our research participants are oftentimes not just down the hall, they can be on the other side of the globe. Right. So, and to bring it right back to Scott Taylor, who you're referring to, the man, the lovely man who he is, Scott had a very close relationship with both his, it was not quite his fiancee, but it was heading there, Mary Fran, the mother of Nolan. And Nolan and Scott were very, very close, and he was developing a father relationship with him. It was very clear. And so it seems as if Nolan and Mary Fran invited Scott to join them in this circle of light and to say goodbye. And it's, I mean, you're right. That story is spectacular. And then, of course, the other piece about it is Scott, like so many of us, didn't talk about this experience for I think 5 years. And then he finally gets the courage to ask Mary Fran's sister, who was in the hospital room with him, to have coffee and say, hey, I just want to ask you if you experienced anything strange that night. And her eyes got big, and then they finally corroborated the experience. But the mission that I have is to really, and that's what the book is aiming to do, is really to share what these experiences are, the myriad of presentations, the power of them, and let's normalize these experiences. Because I think everybody who's open to death and dying and conscious, I mean, you've talked about the movement. I think you've been so instrumental in this natural dying movement, natural death movement. This should be part of that canon. Everybody should know that this is a natural way to die.
Right. Well, one of the things I recognized in 1989, as my mother had come out of remission, the doctors had given her 6 months to live. When my oldest child was 6 months old. And we prayed, and she did a lot of things to improve her health and situation. And she had a 16-year remission. My oldest was 16. And I had, the other the other three were able to be there with us when she was dying. So she went from having one grandchild, my oldest is the oldest grandchild, to having 20. So she got to experience so much life. But as she was coming out of remission, she had so much resistance, and she went into such strong denial. And I realized every time I would go and see her that her physical condition had deteriorated, and I'm a sensitive. And so literally my body would clench up, my gut would clench when I would go in the room and feel. We live 6 hours apart. I was going every few weeks, and I was recognizing where we were headed, and that no one was talking about it because she refused to talk about it. And honestly, William, I'm the kind of person that if I have something difficult ahead of me, I research, I prepare. And so I was the one to start taking natural childbirth classes before that was even a thing. And I took them again with each one of my 5 children. So when I was facing this with my mother, the only book available was Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's book on death and dying. And I happened to be lucky enough that the first female funeral director in the state of Tennessee, where I lived, was a friend at church. And she took me under her wing, and a few others who had had loved ones die in their care took me under their wing and taught me what I needed to know, so that when I walked into her room, I could breathe and give my body a few moments to adjust to my body, was aware of what was happening to her body. But I was able to then breathe through this indoctrinated fear of death that all of us in Western culture have, because death is not given its rightful place in the cycle of life. And so I was able to breathe through that, and that got easier and easier as the months went by. And by the time she passed in 1990, I would say that my comfort, if you will, with the dying process itself, because I recognized it's as messy as birth. Like, there are messy bits, right, to both. And there are mundane bits to both birth and death. And there are moments of majesty in both. And I think because I had that mindset going in, and I had deliberately chosen to let go of ideas like death is a failure, and, death is the opposite of life, which I don't believe. I believe that birth and death are thresholds that life calls us to, and life flows through these thresholds, but one is not the opposite of the other, right? So anyway, I just love how knowing about shared death experiences positions this experience of life as as something that can empower our perspective so that we move beyond our indoctrinated fear of death. And that you describe over and over in the stories in this book how people lose their fear of death when they have a shared crossing.
Yeah. Yeah, you're absolutely spot on. And that is one of the transformational aspects of the shared death experience, is that people will come into a death scene with not a great deal of experience. They will have it. They will walk away. Their eyes are wide open. Their hearts are filled. And they're like, I had no idea death could be like this.
Right.
I had no idea I'd feel this way. Death is a beautiful, majestic, glorious transition from one place called the human realm to a awe-inspiring, love-filled, beyond words place. I don't fear death at all. People just like, and I'm one of these people, of course, so you can see I'm very comfortable stating it this way. That is not to say that dying is not difficult. Dying can be quite difficult. I mean, we have ways to make it, with palliative care to, bring on comfort means, but dying can be difficult. Dying, not just at a physical level, but at saying goodbye to our lives, to reconciling the way we've lived, unfinished business, and as we lose our psychic ego strength towards the end of life, things that we thought we'd work through, come up in a different way. And I work so much with people at the end of life. I see, that relationship that you thought you'd work through 30, 40, 50 years ago somehow is right there. That didn't go down very well. And that's the invitation to heal in this life. And that's what we want to do. We want to heal as much as we can while we're in this human realm, so we don't bring that with us to our next destination. Because in my understanding, I think it's that unfinished psycho, spiritual, emotional stuff, mostly tied up in relationships with other people and with ourselves, that is the karma we bring from life to life. And
I have to say that I believe it also can make our dying process more painful.
Yes, you are so correct there. Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. And what I've seen, I've experienced my own children, five births of my own children. And there's this experience that my Celtic ancestry describes of the veil thinning as these spirits come into their bodies, into this world, and take their first breath. And then there's this experience of that same majesty of the veil thinning when they are departing this 3D mortal experience and moving into the world of light. And, and there's so much power in those moments that can be completely missed if we haven't done the work. So when I hear you talking about your training that helps people prepare themselves to have a shared crossing or prepare themselves for death, when I hear you saying about the life review, yes, this is so important. And I do this work with my own private clients who are dying and their caregivers, so that all of the fears and the blockages and the things that are undone that we will have, discomfort with, can just integrate and drop out of the experience. When you were describing yourself at 32, looking in the hospital bed and finding, oh, wait, I think that's me. You were in that moment so unidentified with the body. And, we're meant to be here in our bodies during our mortal life. We're meant to have this grand experience of going up and down the continuum of human experience, not always, on the happy side, but experiencing all of it. And we do tend to get very identified with the body. And so any practice. For me, it's yoga and meditation, it's pranayama, it's my spiritual practice, but whatever practice helps you loosen that identification from the self with a small s, and be aware that there may be a self with a capital S that belongs to the divine, that is at home there. We might actually consider death, from our perspective in this mortal world, a rebirth back into that place of the divine.
I think you have articulated it as accurately as I have and heard, and yeah, I mean, I'm kind of stumbling with my words, but I think you defined that process quite well. And one thing I want to highlight in what you said is we also see a strong correlation to mindfulness practices, whether they be meditation, prayer, yoga, walking in nature, all of these practices which settle us into our being, develop in ourselves a sense of awareness and attunement to ourselves, our world around us. All of these practices seem to be helpful in enabling the shared death experience. I think 60+% of our shared death experiencers reported having some kind of practice like that. And it could be as simple as walking on the beach each day. I mean, I live in Santa Barbara, so we have a lot of people here, and they say, yeah, I don't really have a mindfulness practice. I go, well, what do you like? Do you do any kind of walks in nature? Goes, oh, I walk on the beach every day. Like, for how long? I go, like, usually about 45 minutes. I said, well, like, how disciplined are you about that? I go, oh, I do it every day. Well, my friends, this is a mindfulness practice. You ask them, it's like, so what happens there? He goes, I just really take in the environment. I love watching the waves go in and out. I see the seabirds, and this is attunement.
Yes, it is.
This isn't the American distracted mind racing around for different forms of stimulation. This is a mind, at one with the Tao, the way of life, the ebb and flow of life. So consonant with your, the natural death, which we're talking about, this natural ebb and flow of life, which is available to all of us. We can train for it. Yeah. And if we do train for it, then my experience is not just the shared death experience, but all of the shared crossings that we study, whether those are pre-death visions and dreams and post-death visitations and recognition of synchronicities, even the recognition of pre-death premonitions, all of these seemingly, for lack of a better term, spiritual, psychic, intuitive transformations, transmissions in the form of information, all of those become more available to us with these mindfulness practices.
I would so agree. So I know we're pushing a little, we're, kind of right at our agreed stopping point, but we haven't gotten to the best part of the book for me anyway. And I'm wondering if we can take a few more minutes, because I was so moved by your description of what happened for you during your father's passing and after everyone else had left the space. And I'm wondering if you can speak to that, what happened for you.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So as I was literally finishing the book, I had a due date, like a month, maybe 6 weeks after my father was dying. He had been in a memory care facility. This was during COVID. My family had finally been allowed to visit, because there was, a little break in COVID actually that allowed us to visit. But we would go in PPE, and we had a rotation going. So each family member would sit vigil as he was in his final days. I I want to be careful. The experience is really laid out in long form, so I can't do that all here, but I want to go to the experience I think, Melody, you're most interested in. And I think that's the experience after my father died. Because this is what we call a gradual shared death experience. And that means I had a very profound experience before he died, when I saw deceased relatives there. And then he dies, and my family departs rather rapidly. But I have this sense that I want to stay with his body. And I stay with his body, and I didn't have a good relationship with my father. He was a very different person than me. He was much more, I'd say he's much more rational, much more cognitive, a very successful businessman. I was more intuitive and spiritual, and he just never understood me. And so there was friction in that lack of connection. But his caregivers came in to say goodbye. And I was shocked that at this, lovely facility that he was staying in, but they knocked on the door and said, could we come in and say goodbye to your father? I said, oh my God. So 6 of these lovely caregivers came in and said goodbye to him, many weeping and really thanking me for allowing them to experience my father in the last few years of his life. I was very touched by that, but I had a response. It was kind of like, wow, these people really experienced you and had a good relationship with you and had a loving relationship with you. And I didn't have that. And in that instant, when I prayed on my knees with his corpse there, I found myself pulled into this other realm, and a movie of snapshot of scenes from our life together and other family members, but mostly having to do with my relationship with my father. It was all about our relationship and the family around it. Just came piling through one after the other. Boom, boom, boom. Some I remembered, most I did not. But when I saw some of these, I remember the most profound realization was, oh, there were times when we experienced love. There were times in the midst of a very dissonant, non-harmonious relationship that there were moments when he did love me as best he could. Not in the way that I would have wanted as a son, but in the way that he could, based on who he was, based on his upbringing, based on his traumas and his losses and his grief, and based on what he was taught was a way to live a meaningful human life. Because his father had died young, and he really was traumatized by that. And so I got the sense that my father was human, and he did the best he could. And that was very healing for me. And when it ended, I was just like, oh, wow. I mean, and that is what we call a life review with the deceased. And once again, I wanted to be clear to people. It's like, these experiences happen in and around death. The moment of death is less important than the whole field around death that can be hours and days before and after. 25% of our experiences, these shared death experiences, happen hours, or in some cases up to a day or longer, outside of the medical definition of death. So you use the term veil opening. That veil opens and it stays open both before and after a death. So just to let people know that this is a lovely wide field of death that is timeless in a certain way. So yeah, that was that experience for me with my father. And
yeah, thank you so much for sharing that with our listeners and viewers. So there's one thing that I know you have coming up. So I want you to tell our viewers how they can get a copy of the book and learn more about the shared crossing, maybe take some online courses, but also you have something coming up with Raymond Moody. So
yeah, thank you. So I mean, first of all, the book is, I feel really pleased about how it came out. I feel like it was it really does the best job I have seen based on research in the hundreds of cases that I've had, both in my clinical practice and in my research with my team here. And I should say it's a team project. We have, Dr. Michael Kinsella, who you remember meeting, Melody, and Dr. Monica Williams. These are people that really help get this research out. And so the book has all of that. So it's great stories, but it also has some research for people who want to see the data. So thank you for that. And then the event that I'm thrilled about is that Dr. Raymond Moody, who really was the first person to discover the shared death experience and give it a name that he popularized, the shared death experience. He and I are considered the leading pioneers in this, and we're going to be doing a free event on March 12th, and you can just go to sharedcrossing.com and you can find out, just go to our events and you'll see it there, and it's free. So just register, and then, we'll love to see you there. But this is a really unique opportunity because Raymond is aging. He's not a young man anymore, but he has been such a supporter and he wants to help us launch this. And, I also want to say something else for your viewers. We have a story library on our website, which has been, it's a video story library. This has been something that I have been trying to get for years. Finally was able to get some really benevolent funders to help us do it because it takes a lot of work. So we have videos of shared death experiences that will be rotating through. So you can just go to our story library and see them firsthand. But yeah, now just to be clear, they're just short snippets, 3 to 5 minutes. So for the most in-depth discussion and my thinking about these experiences, the book is probably better for that. So, and you can get the book anywhere. My publisher is Simon & Schuster, so it's everywhere.
Wonderful.
Yeah. So
wonderful. Well, thank you so much. I am just thrilled that this work is going out and will mature our Western experience of death and bring that experience back into the circle of life where it needs to be. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Melody. A pleasure being here. And I also thank you for the work you're doing too, because you're really on the vanguard of putting death where, as you say, where it needs to be, in the center of our families and communities.
Yes, indeed. Thank you so much.